Talk. I'm your host, Reggie Ford. I want to thank the sponsors and I want to thank the advertisers for supporting this show. On today's show, we have Katie Klon from Home Again. We have Tanya Brower from Virginia Good Life. And we also have Dr. Kimberly Matthews speaking on her dissertation. But before we bring you those interviews, I want to show you an interview I did with gubernatorial candidate 2013 Libertarian Platform, Mr. Robert Sarvis. I am so glad to have you here, but one of the first things I wanted to ask you, I was looking at your resume, it was so impressive. Harvard University, Bachelor of Arts, University of Cambridge, Masters of Applied Science, New York University, Juris Doctorate, and the great George Mason, Master of Arts. Why so much education?
Well, I think it's really important to make sure you're maintaining your human capital, going to where opportunities are. I've always had an interest in both technology and public policy, and so that's why I wanted to add on to my learning economics and law.
Tell me the differences between the Libertarian platform and the Republican and Democratic platform.
Sure, the biggest difference is that the Libertarian Party stands on principle for freedom, both economic freedom and personal liberty, under the rule of law, the idea that we all live under the same laws and they apply equally to all of us. And we start with a very strong presumption that you should be able to live your life how you see fit, love whom you want, and choose how to love them, run your business as you see fit, as long as you're not engaging in force or fraud.
Less regulations?
Less regulations, especially where regulations are no longer serving the public interest, where they've been captured by the industries that they're supposed to be regulating. Industries oftentimes are able to use the tax and regulatory provisions to insulate themselves from competition, close off markets, and that makes us less able to grow jobs, start new businesses, and create broadly shared wealth.
Public secondary education and post-secondary education, how do you feel about that here in Virginia?
Well, I think it leaves a lot to be desired. I think that a lot of people come out of secondary education or high school without the job and life skills that they need. A lot of people come out of college without the job skills and life skills that they need. And so I think that what we really need to do is rethink education for the 21st century. A lot of the subsidies that we have for people end up going to subsidize a model of education that was built for the 20th century and is kind of outdated. People, by the time they're my age, I'm 37, by the time they're my age, they're likely going to have changed careers maybe a couple times. They're likely to have changed jobs several times. And so we need to make sure that our educational institutions are equipped to move them from industry to industry, always making sure that they are able to go from opportunity to opportunity.
Right. What do you say to those people who talk about your youth and say that you do not have the experience? How would you answer those critics?
Well, I have a lot to offer, especially when it comes to an understanding of the role of government, and especially in this new technologically rich, globally competitive economy that we have. I think my experiences as a technology entrepreneur and seeing industries rise and fall in a matter of years rather than decades actually equips me much better than the other candidates for leading in this fast-paced time.
You helped start a law journal at NYU Law School. That is not easy. Tell us how you were inspired to do it. What obstacles did you face, and how did you overcome these obstacles?
Well, the journal we started is called the NYU Journal of Law and Liberty. It was kind of inspired by the need for more classical liberal voices in legal scholarship. I felt that there was definitely a space at NYU for a journal like that. A lot of students would be interested in that, and it turns out they were. We named it after Hayek's Law, Legislation, and Liberty, and our first issue was dedicated to Friedrich Hayek. And he's the economist who I most respect and who most influenced my thinking early on.
Okay.
And you asked about the challenges we faced. It was really about convincing the faculty that there's a need for a journal like this. And once we did that, then they became very supportive. And once the journal was sort of up and moving, it was fairly easy to get the student interest.
Why should that staunch Republican, that diehard Democrat, that swing voter sitting on the fence, why should they vote for you?
Well, they should all vote for me, and the reason is that the Democratic and Republican parties, the government that we have, is a really dysfunctional system. You see that in the government shutdown in Washington, the ever-increasing government intrusion into our lives, enrichment here in Virginia, and it's a really dysfunctional system that we have to stop. We have to get government back into governing in the public interest, get cronyism and corporatism out of government, and get back to the rule of law, the idea that we all live under the same laws.
I've seen you a lot. You've done a lot of work in the community. Let's talk about felons that can't vote. How do you feel about that?
I think it's a tragedy how we've forced so many people into the criminal justice system and taken away their civil rights and not restored them. That's a constitutional provision that we should change. I think that we should have automatic restoration of felons' voting rights. But I'm the only person who's talking about the other end, about how we push so many people into losing their rights through the drug war. And so that's an issue that I'm talking about all over the place. We should legalize marijuana and the drug war and stop criminalizing everything. I'm also the only person who's talking about the threshold for grand larceny. That's a threshold that hasn't changed in decades, and because of inflation, it's now a relatively low number. And so, that's something that we can change as well. But certainly, I'm the only person who's really talking about this issue in a sort of comprehensive manner.
You've caused a stir in the Libertarian Party. You actually woke a lot of people up. However, one of the most staunch libertarians, Ron Paul, did not endorse you. What are your thoughts behind that?
Well, I think that there's a lot going into that. He's a Republican. He's never endorsed, to my knowledge, a Libertarian Party candidate. His son is running for president in 2016. He needs to invest in the GOP party structure. And so I think that's what motivated that. I also think that the younger generation of libertarians breaks with some of the older folks being more principled when it comes to immigration and free trade and the drug war. And so I think that if you look at Ron and Rand Paul, they're not very strong on a lot of those issues, whereas I and many others of the younger generation of libertarians are much more principled when it comes to freedom across the board.
The Affordable Care Act. Good for Americans or bad for Americans?
I think that it moves us farther along a road that we should not be going down, which is further federalization and further attempts to architect through central planning and government planning a healthcare system. One of the problems long before Obama became president, the Republicans and Democrats had saddled the healthcare system at the federal and state levels both with lots of regulations that have created the system that we have now, where poor folks are priced out of the market entirely, both the market for healthcare services and health insurance, where we have no price transparency. Without prices, you can't economize, and we've really restricted entry into the professions. Doctors and nurses and physicians' assistants, we keep those numbers low. It props up their wages, but it makes it harder for people to gain access to quality healthcare services.
But what do you say to that person who says, Bob doesn't have insurance, Bob doesn't have a job, but he has to get some sort of medical attention, and that's coming out of my pocket when I pay these high premium insurances? You do not think Affordable Care Act will offset that?
I don't see how. It's not addressing the real problems that we have, which is it's channeling more people through a health insurance system that is broken, through licensing and parceling out the insurance market state by state, restricting entry, restricting which plans can be offered, mandating a lot of coverage that people don't necessarily want. That raises the cost of insurance, prices those people out of the marketplace. And again, if you're not increasing the number of healthcare professionals, then adding more subsidies is just going to drive up prices more. So that's why I've been talking about expanding the scope of authority of nurses, increasing their independent practice rights, making sure that we have more and more doctors and nurses and physicians' assistants coming into the marketplace.
If you take the money out of a neighborhood, that neighborhood becomes poorer and poorer, and we see that across Richmond. Several neighborhoods are poor, and it's a pipeline to prison. They don't have the proper education. Some of them don't even have a grocery store close to them where they can go to the grocery store. There's an anomaly of things in those neighborhoods. As governor, how would you attack that problem?
I think you have to go to the root of the problem, which is a lot of times we, through local government and state government, we disable communities from creating the wealth and keeping the wealth in the following sense. One of the things we do is we have zoning laws, we have land use ordinances that make it very hard to open businesses either in your home or on the corner. We have a licensing system so that if you want to become a hair braider, you have to go through cosmetology school. There was a libertarian public interest law firm that challenged that and got that overturned. We have an education system that is failing our young people, that they come out of the schools, if at all, they come out with the inability to get jobs. There are no jobs in the communities for a variety of reasons, some of which I mentioned. And so there is a total lack of wealth creation opportunities for all of these families. On top of that, we have a drug war where the enforcement is radically disparate for poor versus rich communities, black versus white. And so all of these issues are areas where the government is really undermining our poor communities. And that's something where we can actually have a lot of influence by creating a more free market, open and competitive markets where people are able to start businesses in their community. Big businesses come in and employ those people. You have grocery stores local. You have banks and banking opportunities. A lot of poor folks are unbanked, meaning that they don't have access to the banking system because of all the regulations and fees that we've added on. And so all of these things are government-induced problems. Now, that doesn't mean that government is always the problem. Government has an important role in protecting rights. So a lot of times, if you have the proper police mentality where they're not enforcing the drug war, but they're actually keeping people safe from violent crimes, that's an important aspect of government and police protection. So there are a lot of things that we can do in the inner cities and around the state to improve our government services, protect rights, make sure people are free and educated so that they can create wealth for their own families and communities.
You talked earlier about legalizing marijuana, and I really want to give you an opportunity to clarify that. I don't want people to misunderstand that and think we're talking about other illegal drugs. So when it comes to crack cocaine and heroin and all of that, it is rampant in the inner city. How would you take more police, more education? What is your stance on that?
I think it's you have to take a multifaceted approach to it. One is making sure that there is economic growth and jobs so that people have opportunities. Oftentimes people without opportunities search for something else to fill their lives with, and oftentimes it's things that hurt themselves. Second, I think that we do need to move away from the criminalized mentality, the prohibitionist mentality, where we just take people who are abusing drugs and force them into the criminal justice system as opposed to a rehabilitative system. We can save a lot of resources by moving away from the criminal mentality and moving towards the rehabilitative mentality. And then the third is education. We have a generational cycle of poverty because people grow up in broken homes. We're taking young men and young women away from their families. Kids are growing up in single parent or being taken from, going into foster care. And these are real problems, and then they go through a school system that's failing them. So enabling them to escape the failing schools, getting an education, having job skills can do great things for breaking the generational cycle.
Mr. Sarvis, good luck on the 5th. You sold me.